Okay, if you had to choose between Beethoven's Fourth Symphony and a rap song talking about getting high in the hood and sleeping around with bees and hoes, what would you choose? Now, the reason I bring this up is because there's a big debate about why modern music sucks. Well, I'll tell you why modern music sucks. Modern music sucks because of modernism. Modernism was all about undoing social norms, getting rid of tradition. There is no religion, there is no God, do what you want to do. If it feels good, do it in the road. There are no rules in the world of art. Marcel Duchamp's fountain, which was just a urinal. You have to admit, we've come a long way since Beethoven's Fourth Symphony, and how many people have actually heard Beethoven's Fourth Symphony, to now where we talk about getting high in the hood and sleeping around with bees and hoes. Obviously, there's a disconnect there, but nobody wants to admit to it. So I have to share this blog post with you. This came out in 2016. This was just after the 2016 election. It's by Linda Schaefer Gleason. Not another music history cliche debunking myths and calling out lazy writing in published articles about classical music. That's a mouthful. So the subtitle is, Why is Modern Music So Ugly? But notice how she dodges the issue in this blog post. In parentheses, she has, Make Classical Music Great Again, so a play on MAGA. She starts out by asking, so some election, huh? I don't know about you, but I was surprised and honestly horrified by the outcome. In addition to my fears for the future, I also feel profound confusion because the results of the U.S. presidential election show me that the world isn't exactly how I thought it was. Well, how exactly is the world supposed to be? And more to the point, why aren't you talking about the issue at hand? Why modern music is so ugly? I realize that my perception of the political landscape is shaped by being a white woman who's lived in liberal areas for most of my life. Can we say white liberal guilt? I had no idea that Donald Trump had that much support, and I didn't know how many people supported, or at the very least, could overlook the very behaviors I found unacceptable. What behaviors do you find acceptable? I thought the country was mostly like me, and the election tells me that this is not the case. Well, maybe this person needs to get out a little bit more. Talk with the people. Now, this is a real scream. This next paragraph. I take my identity as a scholar very seriously, not just in my work, but in my life. Okay, so if you take your work as a scholar very seriously, why aren't you talking about the issue at hand in the opening sentence to the first paragraph of this blog? Well, I don't know. When I'm confronted with evidence that contradicts something I believe to be true, I should not ignore it. Though it would comfort me to look for other different evidence that would confirm my previous worldview, it's ultimately bad practice for a historian. So you admit here to be a good historian, be a good scholar, you have to look at history, look at things objectively. History is what it is, you can't change it, you've got to learn from it. I'm still trying to make sense of the information we received last week, and this blog post is part of that. So she talks about how she received a message from a reader, I'm not going to mention that person's name, on Facebook, who sent her a link to a blog post proclaiming that modern classical music is dead and feminism killed it. I thought it would be a good addition to my ongoing series on snobbery. You see where this is going? So if you enjoy great art, great music, you don't want to go to a concert where you're listening to nothing but atonal and dissonant music by people who are writing this music for themselves, for their own little circle of friends, or you don't want to go to a football game at an arena somewhere and be preached to from the field about politics, somehow you're a snob. Since the author Max Roscoe repeatedly asserts the superiority of classical music up to a certain era. Well, in many cases, that's true. Yes, there was a lot of bad music being written back then, but there were a lot of great pieces of music being written. There's always good and bad in every era. But he's talking about the structure of classical music compared to what we have now. It is in many ways superior. Just on the structure alone. You had beautiful songs in the 60s by the Beatles. You had these rock ballads in the 80s. And of course you had grunge in the 90s, which was a reaction to all that. Roscoe repeatedly asserts the superiority of classical music up to a certain era, as I mentioned, and supports his opinions with assumptions not supported by history. Normally, that is ideal fodder for this blog, and ideal is italicized. So I'd like to know, what isn't ideal fodder for your blog? 9 paragraphs down. Takes 9 paragraphs to get to the crux of the argument. So she says here, the blog's founder, where this article by Max Roscoe appeared, Rosh, or Rosh, R-O-S-H, is a major figure in the pickup artist community or culture, which tells men that the best way to convince women to get with them, trying to clean up the language here, is to assert dominance over them, and if she doesn't respond to that tactic, she's not a woman you'd want to get with in the first place. I became aware of Rosh or Rosh after his comments about the mass shooting at UCSB. What does that have to do with the topic at hand? But she says here that she didn't want to go kicking a hornet's nest. So finally, we get to the meat of the article here, meat of the post. In his post, Roscoe claims that modern music is dissonant and forgettable. Much of it is, destined not to last. He elevates Beethoven as the ideal composer, an opinion shared by many who have never heard of SJWs, PUAs, and MRAs. Now, MRAs, if I didn't mention it, are men's rights associations or organizations. Well, I've heard of SJWs. I know who Beethoven is. He connects dissonance to feminism and other progressive movements, claiming that they want us to accept ugliness as beautiful. Well, isn't that what the modernists did at the turn of the last century? Turn of the 20th century? Uplift the vulgar and the profane, get rid of tradition, upset social norms? That's exactly what they did. This argument rests on the assumption that music's primary function is to be beautiful. It even says the purpose of music is to relax, to express our emotions and our humanity, which is a cliche I plan to unpack in a future post. Well, why aren't you talking about that here? This is a common view, but it is not an objective fact. Some people use music to relax. Some people use music as a form of expression. However, these are not universal truths. They aren't even completely true of the classic works that he mentions. Composers and musicians are under no obligation to conform to his expectations. Well, Roscoe never said that these composers were. He's talking about the state of music as it is now compared to what it was 200 to 300 years ago. That's the point he's trying to make. Now, this whole idea about music being beautiful, consonant or dissonant, as you call it in music theory. Well, Franz Berwald was doing things in the 1840s. Franz Berwald was a Swedish composer. He was doing things in the 1840s that were 30, 40 years ahead of their time. He wrote a symphony called, he had 4 symphonies. Now, the numbering on these is a little confusing. But he wrote a symphony called the Symphonie Singulière, or Singular Symphony. And in this symphony, he built it on a 2-note motive. It's pretty cool. Just the opening. This is the opening to the symphony. I know I'm not the best singer, but just bear with me here. Bum, 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 bum. And you can, just by me singing that, you can almost hear the harmony in the background. So you have this harmony built against this 2-note motive, or motif, if you want to call it that. And he does this all throughout the symphony. And the second movement has this scherzo, or livelier section, sandwiched in between the movement. Then he uses cyclical form, doing this process that we would see later in the music of people like Franz Liszt. Then in 1807, you had Joachim Nicholas Egert. Who's ever heard of Joachim Nicholas Egert? Another Swedish composer, who, as far as we know, wrote the first symphony to use trombones. And both symphonies, the Singulière and the Symphony No. 3 by Egert, are in 3 movements. But an Egert symphony has a fugue in the finale. And this is the main theme that he uses in that fugue, or in that finale. Bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 bum. And he builds on that. But who was writing that in 1807 or 1845 other than people like Egert and Berwald? So you have these composers that were working with consonants and dissonance and trying to explore different keys and doing things that we do now. It's all about artistic integrity. And somehow she doesn't get that in this blog. So getting back to what she's saying here, in the arrogance in this next paragraph, you just can't escape it. If Roscoe wishes to consume music in this way, that's his prerogative. He's certainly welcome to dislike some styles of music, but his opinions are not facts and do not determine the value of all music. All's in all caps. His assumption that classical music is beautiful leads him to believe, therefore, music that is not beautiful has failed to be classical music. Another one-take video today. Well, that isn't the issue. The issue is artistic integrity. She just doesn't get it. To him, music like a woman exists to please him and others like him. His opinion is the only opinion that matters because he believes it to be actual reality. This is why he views feminism and most postmodern philosophies as dangerous. They challenge his authority to determine reality. Well, look at what they were talking about in the 60s. Women's lib. You didn't need a man. Being married is prison. A urinal is a piece of art. To him, they are lies because they deny what he believes to be a fundamental truth of existence. Then she goes on to talk about his covering of mathematics and music, how sometimes math doesn't necessarily work out when you're talking about tuning, and that's true. But a lot of music is built on mathematical principles. Elsewhere, I've mentioned how even in tonal music, consonance and dissonance depend on context. I consulted an ethnomusicologist friend of mine, not going to mention that person's name, for non-Western uses of dissonance, and he sent me a fascinating link to Bulgarian singing, which embraces dissonance. Pointed out that Balinese Gamalean, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's Gamelan, purposely uses dissonance to give the sound a shimmering quality, and that the scales of Havanese Gamalean have no relation to the overtone series aside from the presence of octaves. In traditional Irish music, they have historically used notes between the 12 notes of Western tuning for color. These examples demonstrate that beauty is not a universal constant. It's not about beauty, it's about artistic integrity. Again, she can't get it. It's not that Roscoe would deny that these examples exist, but he would probably say they are inferior to Western classical music, as John Hale strongly implied in his post on Musicology Now. It's uncomfortable to point out the assumptions of white supremacy that underlie many conversations about classical music. Okay, so we're going to blame this on white supremacy, not the fact that people aren't willing to sit down and write a good melody, a good piece of music. Roscoe's charge rhetoric makes his post easy to dismiss, but his opinions are not limited to the MRA and PUA communities. Take, for example, British music journalist Norman Lebrecht. He's a prolific blogger, posting several times a day with news about the classical music world, and some of my colleagues refer to his blog as a tabloid, and she gives some examples. You can click on the links. Nevertheless, he's an influential voice in the English-speaking classical music community online and reaches an audience whose love of classical music forms part of their identities, as it does for me. Lebrecht's blog skews conservative. That has nothing to do with anything. Doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative. It's all about, again, artistic integrity, writing the best music possible that's going to reach the widest audience. With a major distrust of multiculturalism, feminist musicology, etc., and he's quoted as saying, "I'd feel very awkward if I had to watch a standing woman's back for 2 hours at such a close distance." That's tongue-in-cheek. The point is, people don't want all this stuff crammed down their throat. They want to go and see a great performance of a great piece of art, great piece of music. They want to go see a great painting. I'm sorry, but they don't want to go see Petra, where you have a woman police officer squatting with a synthetic puddle of urine. They don't want to see that. Why can't we get back to our roots and create great art and great music that's going to inspire people for generations to come? I don't understand this. It's not hard to figure out. And now you wonder why modern music sucks. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, you know what to do. You can also follow me at Instagram, #JasonComposes, because I write music in my spare time. Or you can follow me at Twitter, Culture Confederacy, at CultureConfed1 on Twitter. This is the Culture Confederacy saying peace out. Stay safe, everybody. God bless this great thing called the United States. You know we do it here. This is where the past crashes with the present. I'll catch you next time.